Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, July the 29th, 2022. Just a reminder that in approximately 90 minutes, I'm going to be discussing Tom Bower's blockbuster biography of Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz, which is called Revenge. First up, though, I am going to talk about a new essay by Frank Wright, which is part two in The Decline of the West, called The Broken Heart of Man, and you can find it at his Substack. In this part, I will examine how Western man has charted a great retreat. No more does he seek to be great-souled. He seeks comfort and gratification, not hardship and just reward. This is the story of the thymotic impulse, which was once a glowing coal of hunger in the soul of the West for justice. Now it is simply a cry for attention, which burns the eyes of the viewer. From the actions of the soul to the need to be noticed by taking offense, the understanding of the thymotic impulse is an indication of the contrary argument to progress. We have become not more morally refined, but less. What is within us being rudely understood and bluntly expressed in the examination of Thymos can be adduced to demonstrate this decline. Thymos meaning spiritedness. We have made of ourselves a primitive instrument as the tools we use have become more advanced, impoverishing our interior lives as they are increasingly displaced by digital analogies of the self. This is how we vanish. By infusing pixels with our dreams, we fall asleep to ourselves and our humanity. We travel from Homer through Fukuyama to the United States government in this post, tracing the fall from the fine to the febrile. We may use the past and what remains of it to reflect on what the present might mean. We may try to understand what has survived from our neighbors in time and what has not. This is the reason, Frank Wright writes, I like to look at what it meant to live long ago. To look at Homer, to look at Gilgamesh, is to try to see with the eyes of the dead. It is a small wonder, half imagined and half glimpsed, to picture the world as it was to them. Perhaps we can see around ourselves to something else, if we borrow the words of the departed. It is a waste of time, however, to point to statues and columns as if that made you superior to do so. That is tokenism, and it is as valuable as reading out a telephone directory to display your command of names. It is the difference between repetition and meaning. We are looking for the souls of our ancestors, not for a catchphrase to help us preen in front of people. All great songs are about human folly. The Iliad is one, the Odyssey another. Men at every level of life, enslaved by their passions, served by their wits, nonetheless to burn out in that mortal way so envied by the Olympian gods. It is to be remembered that these deities, which appear often in both books, were usurpers and not creators. Amusing themselves by sporting with the fortunes of men, they were gamers playing at life, living for nothing but pleasure and self. They could not be trusted and would often be found roaring drunk, mocking a cripple at one of their cloud-wreathed parties when not committing outrages on earth. Mortals could not turn to these deathless poseurs for consolation. The gods of the Homeric world did not appear as good advisors. They would more likely appear as a sexually incontinent swan to violate your daughter. For this reason, Homeric man relied upon himself to navigate the nuances of life. In making sense between his own passion's principles, the customs expected of him, and the conduct of the immortals, he developed a complex and detailed inner life, drawing with the filament of practical wisdom a web of meaning between his thoughts and his instincts, between himself and the world. Thymos in Homer points to this rich inner life. It suggests that place where everything that becomes visible in behavior begins, as well as that which remains hidden in the thymos. An intangible source of impulse, then, which may or may not move behavior in some obvious way. It encompasses the desires, emotional responses, the motivation to act, and some of the reasoning behind that. For Aristotle, thymos was a kind of desire, distinct from the desire for goodness or that for bodily pleasure. Although he saw in thymos the root of a special kind of anger, the kind of anger which drives men to right wrongs, it was for him far more than the passion for retaliation. It was the seat of the need for liberty, for self-reliance, and for independence of means and of thought. It inspired man to be better than his base desires and also gave him the courage to defend what was just. Nonetheless, to him, it was not an intellectual faculty, but something almost bestial. This is the rule of the human being against that of nous, the intellect, which is the rule of the divine and of the law. Thymos is said to mishear the voice of reason, like servants who rush to enact a command before understanding it, or dogs who bark before they know who is there. It is an impetuous humor and compels reason in its thymotic heat to respond. The thymos is aroused more towards associates and friends than towards strangers if it thinks that it has been slighted. Unquote. Here is a distinction between the Aristotelian thymos and that of our times. It feels most keenly the slights of trusted and well-known people. The indignation of our times is commonly aroused by things seen on the internet. In Britain, people are questioned and even arrested on the basis of some anonymous person complaining of so-called distress at something they have said or liked or retweeted. To Aristotle, the thymos was the impulse to right a real wrong, not to commit one by feigning offense. Such is the degree to which our society, its customs and institutions have become morally inverted and infused with a zealotic outrage entirely in the imagination of people, thereby seeking advantage. To conclude, thymos to Aristotle suggests self-assertiveness, manly courage, and the desire to measure one's mettle against that of others, whilst providing for gentleness and friendliness. It is clear that to Aristotle, thymos was one seat, at least, of the virtues to which man, in his view, ought to aspire to live a good life. Now, Frank Wright speaks of Plato. To remind ourselves of the earlier Greeks, let us remember the mention in Homer of the barking heart of Odysseus. This is not to say that he has the heart of a mindless dog, but to show a distinction between, quote, that which makes calculations about better and worse, and that which rages without reason, unquote. It is not blind, but clear-sighted rage to which the thymos moves Odysseus. It is a recognition of his unfair treatment and also of his appetite for justice. This reaction contains a sense of continuity. For this judgment to be so, it must arise from an understanding of the past and of what can be made in that light of the future. Both in the Republic and in the Phaedrus, thymos is the helpmeet of reason against the urgency of desire. It is the good horse, which loves moderation as much as it does honor, joining the charioteer in its opposition to the shamelessness of the bad. Later, Chrysippus would reimagine the thymos in a much more modern idiom, seeing it as the expression or site of mental conflict. This idea of the war within the self gave way to the notion, some centuries later, in the ideas of Philodemus, the Epicurean, that the thymos was mere rage. Modern thymos. As we know from words like justice, freedom, ethical, and woman, meanings change over time for reasons other than habits of use. They are informed and increasingly directed by ideological fanatics seeking to Lysenkoize the mind of the speaker into submission. The dictionary definition of thymos has survived in the process, which has degraded that of adult human females, and so gives us a fair sweep in this. Thymos, 1, the heart, mind or heart as the seat of strong feelings or passions. 2, a desire or hunger of people for personal recognition and acknowledgement of their worth and significance. 3, people who are sensitive about their self-worth and the significance of their group. And 4, the psychological origin of political action. Some of the past survives in this, but is being howled out by the ever-present. Thymos in the age of the intermediate. In the perpetual now of the digital age, where everything is phenomenological and nothing really real, strong feelings or passions are the evidence of justice. Shouting incoherently means you will win, or have already won the argument, since the other side is likely prohibited from whispering in objection. Yet it is the second and not the third point above which interests me. I believe the self-worth argument to be as false as that for tolerance. It is camouflage. Such people as cry foul for a living and demand the destruction of civilization as their blood price do not have honest intentions, nor do they have severe grievances. These are gambits for attention in the political economy of raw spectacle. Eyeballs are power. We live, I regret to say, in an age of optics. The need to be noticed is twofold. It promises, but can never really deliver, to assuage the gnawing sense of insignificance which plagues the godless. It converts readily into rewards: promotion, advancement, sponsorship, power, vengeance, the broken love to break things. It is how they imagine they will make the world equal by spoiling everything until it is as ugly and ruined as themselves. These are the children of the Velvet Revolution, of the peaceful fall of the Soviet Union. In place of a peace dividend, we got a forever war machine dedicated to spreading the consumer society as far as its air force could reach. Francis Fukuyama and the Thymotic End of History. And here we have a quotation from Fukuyama's book, The End of History and the Last Man. Thymos is something like an innate human sense of justice. People believe that they have a certain worth, and when other people act as though they are worth less, when they do not recognize their worth at its correct value, they become angry. The intimate relationship between self-evaluation and anger can be seen in the English word synonymous with anger, indignation. Dignity refers to a person's sense of self-worth. Indignation arises when something happens to offend that sense of worth, unquote. Fukuyama recalls some of the sophistication of the inner life of Homeric man, but only enough to yoke it to the contemporary concept of self-centered justice. If it offends me, I am right. This is to ennoble the present as it bemerges the past, for the indignation most fervently expressed these days is done so by people who have long abandoned any human dignity. Shock-haired obese blobs howling of body shaming, strange histrionic creatures screaming fascist about the word woman, perverts crying foul over the objection to their being alone with your children to indoctrinate and groom them. In some American cities, it seems the remedy for soaring crime is to legalize it. The reduction of Thymos to the indignation of the professionally offended makes a falsehood of honor and of outrage. It is the outrageous themselves who cry foul. Second, Fukuyama's consumer liberalism must of necessity celebrate the debased values of the self and its tiny, shrill obsessions with its own feelings, since the elevation of these desires to the pinnacle of human aspiration forms the basis of much of his thinking. His is the prophecy of the satisfying marketplace, of the stability of democracy and the consolations of consumption. These are as empty as his contention of self-worth, which is never explained. For Fukuyama, dignity is a function of your self-appraisal. Anger is the result when others disagree. This is what he calls justice. In case you have missed it, it is usually chaperoned by crime freaks shouting and flames. Robert Kagan, Professional Obscenity. The co-founder of the now defunct Project for a New American Century is Robert Kagan. His wife is Victoria Newland, who works with his mentee, Antony, or Al, Blinken, as Deputy and Secretary of State of U.S. government, respectively. Robert Kagan is an influential neoconservative and has done more than perhaps anyone alive to maintain the grip of this insane death cult on the foreign policy of the United States. He replied to Fukuyama in his book, The Return of History, with a countervailing thesis of international relations. Rather than the serenity of consumer satiety, an opt-in Western empire of elections and stuff, he averred that human instincts could not be changed by these palliatives. Naturally, his remedy was for this to continue to ruin the Western world by propelling it into an endless cycle of wars, unwinnable but lucrative for him and his friends, at least. He too spoke of the Thymos. Quote, the ancient Greeks believed that embedded in human nature was something called Thymos, a spiritedness and ferocity in defense of clan, tribe, city, or state. In the Enlightenment view, however, commerce would tame and perhaps even eliminate Thymos in people and in nations, unquote. Kagan has certainly been spirited and definitely ferocious, but not in the defense of the American people. Together with people like Antony Al Blinken, who regards Kagan as his mentor, he has never ceased to undermine any attempt to steer America away from the atrocity cycle of so-called liberal intervention. Here below is a sample of the kind of work he and Blinken have done in the service of this debased and rotten notion of Thymos. There's a tweet from Al Blinken. Can we find a foreign policy of responsible global engagement that most Americans support? Bob Kagan and I offer our take. America First is only making the world worse. Here's a better approach. Notable for all the wrong reasons. As Eliot said, to do the right thing for the wrong reason is a dreadful sin. The reasons for what is done in our name these days are as wrong as the deeds themselves. Most politics at the state level makes no sense at all when viewed from the point of view of the interests and welfare of the people. It makes perfect sense when seen as a display of raw power, of some banner of values themselves so degraded as to be parodic in frank description. I do not mean to say that what the author of Hagature says is true, that each generation is worse than the last. With the illustration of the decline of Thymos and of the very sense that man has of himself, I will seek to show that inexorable moral progress is an illusion, and to suggest once again that instead of a line soaring ever upwards, the destination of empires may chart a more realistic course. And Frank Wright concludes, before our times, men thought it natural to hold everything up to the seasons. It is a sign of our times that its signs are so seldom noticed at all. Yes, the sun shines outside today, but some of us has gone the way of winter. And again, this is from the Substack of Frank Wright, which I highly commend to you. Let's go to the chat. And we'll start from the top. Hello to Chokakin666. Hello to Anran Oscar Toe. Is the password no longer Fidelio? And remember, there's only one password. There's not a second password. Hello to Dan Tricky Woo. Don from Beyond, J Boss. Mercurius Olycus, who says, greetings, chaps from Queensland, 9 a.m. Saturday. Hello to David the Gnome. And Tricky Woo. Kevin got made, says Jokin 666. Well, you seem to like it. Anran says to David the Gnome, saw your comment in AM's chat, the war is against Satan, but it has many fronts. Economics is one of them. No. Who is Oh, Oren McIntyre. Yes. Yes, I haven't seen much of his Substack, but I've greatly enjoyed his tweets for some time. He describes himself as a recovering journalist. Hello, buddy. He says, hey, Kevin, at baseball tryouts for next year's team. A bit early in the day, isn't it? Though I wish he'd stop using cathedral. Yes, indeed. Cathedrals are beautiful things. Max Vitriol says KMG looks like the guy who delivers I don't think so with a steely gaze after you ask if you can get into the club. Can't spot the bulge of the shoulder holster, though. No, I'm reminded the Simpsons episode when he couldn't drink at Moe's because he got thrown out of Moe's, so he went to all these bars, including a lesbian bar, and then he went to some Tony cocktail bar, and some snooty waiter came up, or maitre d' came up to him and said, could you just leave quietly? And Homer backs away and says, yes, sir. Aran is a disciple of the great Yarvin, says Oscar Toe. Quashalango, hello, says Aran has moved beyond Yarvin. Metal Mike asks, modern Thanos? Mercurius Olycus says, cathedral is the worst metaphor ever. I can't get mad at Yarvin because of his hair, I ask Oscar Toe. How about his girlfriend? What's going on there? Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth. Thank you for your kind words, Metal Mike. I've been listening to the myth of the 20th for a long time, says David the Gnome. Oh, Chokin666 says Yarvin is coming out as neocon puppet. And anybody else in the chat? I'm not seeing any other different names. Oh, hello to Lamprey Milk. Sounds like the article I wrote last year. I always look forward to your articles, Lamprey. Whenever you have a new one, send me a DM and I'll talk about it here. We're talking about Pleasure Man, are we? We're not supposed to talk about that. I know them from Ryan Landry. Yes. Ryan Landry, he manages the website The American Sun, where I find um, every Friday he has a list of linked articles, which are quite good. Jeffrey Pye, hello, says I like the gangster Mick Jones suit. You need a Les Paul, looking sharp. Thanks as well for the Emmett Rhodes reminder. His recordings were just as well crafted as his songs. A real pioneer. Yes, very well recorded. That song really wanted you. You have this interplay between the electric guitar and the acoustic guitar, and the bite of the acoustic guitar really bursts through the speakers. Hello to Ruslan Akhmetov. And this is Kevin's Guys and Dolls long Good Friday look, says Anrun. Hauper says, I'd say this suit calls for a jazz master and a fedora. Okay. Metal Mike says, Project for a New American Century wrote the white paper, which suddenly was enacted in its entirety after 9/11. They had this remarkable plan for carving up the Middle East, mostly the countries that they didn't like. Suddenly they were to become much smaller. And now we have this new plan to carve up Russia into about 10 or 12 different entities, with Muscovy being reduced to about the size of what, Belgium or something like that? Hello to Laird Gordon McDoodle. Hello to Jay Boss. And hello to Clown Welt. And let's go to Jim Kunstler's Friday column. And it's a grave column because these are grave times in which we live. I mean, he's identifying a problem that, I think I can say without hyperbole that if this is not resolved in the interests of justice, then I just suppose we'll all have to live with the conclusion that the United States of America has become a gangster state. Playing Chicken with the Fates is the title. Who is surprised that the U.S. government's war on the American people is not going any better than its sponsored war in Ukraine? The only thing the government is really good at is covering up its crimes, which mainly requires them to do nothing. Don't investigate anything. Don't furnish documents to anyone. Don't answer official letters. Slow walk every required action, and otherwise dodge, duck, deny, deflect, and dissemble. Now, even that game plan is falling apart. Some senior officials in the FBI turned whistleblower this week, perhaps desperate to preserve their self-respect, and finally cleared up one of the great mystifications of our time, namely, how is it that the Hunter Biden laptop, stuffed with incriminating memoranda of bribery, treason, and diverse felonies, and in the FBI's possession for 2.5 years now, just sat gathering dust in some sub-basement cubbyhole while Joe Biden, the putative president, or more likely the enigmatic clack behind him, was allowed to carry out a demolition of America's economy and culture? And Jim Kunstler comments, the answer is one Brian Auten, FBI senior analyst, who engineered a scheme to label Hunter's laptop Russian disinformation, which allowed FBI Director Christopher Wray to throw a switch that turned off any further inquiry in the matter beginning in August before the 2020 presidential election. In turn, other senior FBI officials had all the documents pertaining to the decision process on that matter locked up in a specific file that would never see the light of day. Auten's action led to the release of a letter signed by 50 former intelligence officials, labeling the laptop as a Russian disinfo op, which became the basis for social media to conspire to censor any discussion of the laptop and its contents. And so it was that a political puppet deeply in the pay of foreign interests got shoehorned into the White House. And then there's a sentence I can't repeat here. Turns out that Agent Brian Auten was also involved in favorably vetting the Steele dossier when it was used to justify FISA court warrants against figures in Trump's 2016 campaign, part of the Russiagate operation that disordered and disabled President Trump's entire 4-year term. Well, now you know. Perhaps Special Counsel John Durham knows this too. If he didn't before, he must now. Eventually, Auden will have to answer for all this, maybe after the midterm elections. We must imagine that he will implicate many other familiar figures in the process who were on the scene at the time, including Peter Strzok, Andrew McCabe, and James Comey, comfortably sitting on the sidelines low these many years, enjoying their book royalties and cable news salaries. Senator Chuck Grassley, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, says he will hold hearings about this. When? The Senate is scheduled to be in recess August 6th to September 6th for politicking back home. Maybe after that, Senator Grassley will actually produce his whistleblowers in open session, unlike the 2019 first impeachment of Donald Trump, in which chief whistleblower, CIA agent Eric Ciaramella, amazingly never made an appearance. But that will be refreshing. I'll just break in here to say, I don't know if you remember this, not, but social media, including this platform, took the position that this man's name must never be spoken. It was almost like Yahweh, the tetragrammaton. And so I called him Bagpipe because that's what his name means. It would also be nice to hear from FBI Director Wray. Did he approve of the decision to label Hunter's laptop disinformation? Was he familiar with the contents of the laptop, the emails between Hunter and his business associates and agents of the CCP? Did Wray happen to examine any of the pornographic videos of orgies with Hunter's stable of Russian whores plus the crack smoking? Did Wray wonder whether equally bad or worse material was in the hands of Uncle Z's regime? Did it occur to Wray that all this might compromise the big guy in the Oval Office? It also would be edifying to hear from Wray's boss, Attorney General Merrick Garland, during his 20 months on the job. Has he ever inquired of his FBI what's up with that Hunter Biden laptop? Was he acquainted with the contents? Half the country has seen the videos of Hunter cavorting naked in hotel rooms and lighting up the crystal meth, but not Garland. There's rumored to be more depraved material on the laptop involving minors that even conscientious auditors outside of government have seen and deemed too atrocious to release. Copies of Hunter's hard drive are in possession of many people outside government. Well, when I first learned that there were all of these photographs and videos that were available, I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll take a look. And then I thought, no, I am not going to take a look for two reasons. I have been warned that there are things there that were so disgusting that they might damage my soul. And secondly, it occurred to me that even watching these, seeing these pictures or watching these videos might actually constitute a crime. So my advice to all of you is don't go looking for them. Back to Jim Kunstler. I hope Senator Grassley also calls Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Attorney General, now Garland's right hand, who was formerly President Barack Obama's White House Homeland Security Advisor, a fancy way of describing her role in weaponizing the apparatus of the security state against the Democratic Party's political opponents. Monaco's current role is the DOJ fixer, the person who makes sure that federal law enforcement does nothing about the crimes carried out by Obama, former CIA Director John Brennan, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, and many other now well-known names in the Russiagate cosmos, as well as continuing to squelch any inquiry on the Biden family's criminal operations. All of this is going to blow open, of course, and all at the same time that two other big things blow up. One, the realization that the government lied about everything in the COVID-19 story, and two, deepening U.S. economic chaos, including the implosion of markets, derivatives, banks, and the U.S. dollar. Kunstler concludes, some observers say that Joe Biden has nothing left except to shove the USA into a hot war. Kind of looks like he's trying, sending U.S. special forces to Ukraine's border and all. I don't think he'll dare cross that line, though. To me, it's more likely that our government will summon, shall we say, a special sort of doctor from the intel community to administer a permanent sleeping med to the big guy. Did you see how bug-eyed he was on video the other day? Didn't even blink for the longest time. Looks like he badly needs sleep, a big sleep, the biggest sleep there is. Wait for it. I did indeed see that video. You can find it at Citizen Free Press. Biden goes 40 seconds without blinking. He really looks like some sort of plastic bodysuit that has been pulled very tightly over a plastic skeleton. It's suggested here by Kane, a Citizen Free Press, that it's a side effect of Botox treatment. There are other more fantastic explanations, which you can find by a piece by Gerard Kaonga at Newsweek. Joe Biden's eyes in video spark wild conspiracy theories. Oh, yes. Biden posted a video, or someone on his behalf. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-cop. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-democracy. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-American. Yes, traitor Joe Biden is instructing Americans what counts as patriotism. Curious, no? However, viewers were drawn to Biden's appearance, most notably how wide he kept his eyes open in the 17-second clip. Some Twitter users have claimed the White House used a body double for the video, while others have said CGI or green screens were used due to his eyes being open so wide and the president not blinking. Donald Trump lacked the courage to act, Biden said. Yes, and Donald Trump was no good about getting coronavirus either. Biden was so much better at it. That wimp, Trump, he had to be airlifted to Walter Reed. Not Joe Biden. And this is a disturbing story about the FBI. It's from Eric Bohm at Reason. First, the FBI raided a private business to seize safe deposit boxes and assets belonging to hundreds of people who were not suspected of having committed any crimes. Now, prosecutors are trying to keep the public in the dark about why the brazen forfeiture effort was undertaken in the first place and are offering little justification for why such secrecy is necessary. I'm going to suggest a reason. Don't you know that there's an insurrection going on, which justifies any action by the FBI or the Department of Justice? 4 depositions that could be crucial to understanding the motivations and intentions behind the FBI's March 2020 raid of U.S. private vaults, a Beverly Hills-based safe deposit box storage business, are being kept confidential at the request of federal prosecutors. Attorneys representing some victims of the raid say the depositions could contain important information about how and why the FBI decided to seize and catalog the private belongings of U.S. private vaults customers. They have asked the federal judge handling the case to allow the transcripts of those depositions, including one interview with Lynn Zellhart, the FBI's lead agent in the case, to be filed in their entirety. Unless Judge R. Gary Klausner allows the depositions to be made public, attorneys for the plaintiffs will have to continue heavily redacting their filings in the case. That might be sufficient to address the acute legal issues in the lawsuit, but it obviously harms the general public's right to be informed about the bigger issues at stake. We have a rare interview, which appears translated at Unheard, from Michel Houellebecq. And Francois Valentin writes, Michel Houellebecq's public interventions usually attract attention. So one of the most translated and best-selling French writers in the world gave a conference earlier this month to the monarchist group Action Française. It is surprising to see it hasn't filtered into the Anglo press, perhaps because the Anglo press is not interested in anything that happens outside the Anglo world, or perhaps because North American press is not interested in anything that happens outside North America. Unless, oh my God, Brexit's going to be the end of the world and it's all tied up with Orange Man bad. Action Française, or AF, is no ordinary political group. Founded in 1899, it became the nation's leading reactionary voice, providing the French right of the early 20th century with prominent intellectuals. The group included the historian Jacques Banville, and most famously, the virulent anti-German and anti-Semitic essayist turned Vichy supporter Charles Maurras. Entire generations of right-wingers, including a young Charles de Gaulle, would read the AF's daily newspaper, edited by Maurras. Maurras' Vichyism cost the AF dearly after the war, however, with the organization now a shadow of its former self and only seeing something of revival in the past decade. So when Houellebecq Perhaps France's well-known intellectual, granted a 2-hour audience at the AF's Parisian headquarters. Naturally, many were curious to hear what the media-shy author had to say. Houellebecq began by delivering some pugnacious zingers against the left to the delight of the tightly packed room. For the author, the left feels lost, and just like an injured animal, it becomes mean. It wasn't the case when I started writing. It now feels itself dying, so it becomes mean. Nevertheless, he fell well short of coming out as a monarchist. Houellebecq admitted to finding most of the work of the AF disappointing and has hardly read the AF's pantheon of authors. The reason for his presence? Simply his curiosity for le royalisme. And yet Houellebecq, among his more literary marks, he cares little for style and admires authors like Balzac or Dostoevsky, who both, quote, wrote somewhat carelessly and sacrificed a lot in the name of intensity, unquote, did give a rare insight into his bleakly pessimistic and reactionary worldview. The French Revolution, a disaster for Houellebecq, who also confessed his admiration for the reactionary essayist Joseph de Maistre. The Renaissance, the start of a long decadence, quote, after that it's all downhill and it's not over, unquote. Houellebecq also believes that there will be a war with Islam. We have to know that and prepare for it. Indeed, in his novel Submission, 2015, Houellebecq had already imagined the democratic election of an Islamist president in the 2022 French election and predicted a relatively peaceful transition towards an Islamic society. And he still believes that, quote, all happiness is of a religious nature, even if the religion is crappy, unquote, which makes the demographically vibrant Islam a better fit for survival in the upcoming consumerist and transhumanist era. Houellebecq does find one source of optimism, the Gilets jaunes, who had rocked Emmanuel Macron's first term. He felt complete solidarity with those that were presented as hicks and beggars, but he also saw a real level of thought. He believes they could come back, but in the meantime offers a populist cookbook of measures to unite a France torn by class war, referenda, the election of judges, no reason for the judiciary to evade democracy, and a national budget voted by citizens. Surprisingly revolutionary proposals from a man who is billed as a dyed-in-the-wool reactionary. And, oh, yes, our little interest in the rest of the world. Do you remember when it seemed like the Western world was obsessed with South Africa? Nelson Mandela, the world's greatest hero, greatest ever hero, and how apartheid must be torn down. And so it was. And then South Africa became the murder and rape capital of the world, and we all discreetly averted our eyes. And really, nobody gives a toss about South Africa anymore. This is Walter Finch at The Mail. A South African opposition figure has warned of an impending civil unrest in the continent's richest country and likened it to an Arab Spring. The controversial opposition leader, Julius Malema, spoke of the country waking up one day with very angry people that are not going to be reasonable. Discontent with the ruling African National Congress party in South Africa is at all-time high levels due to social conditions within the country and the poor becoming poor, according to Malema. When the unled revolution comes, the first target is going to be white people, Malema told the BBC's Hard Talk program, adding that the uprising would also target black elites. What, he didn't mention Asian Indians as well? I should have thought they'd be near the top of the list. Of course, how could one expected anything different in South Africa? South Africa is not an organic country. It is a creation of colonialism, and it is made up of various ethnic groups who don't like each other, to put it mildly. There's a long piece in Unheard by Brian Pottinger, who is former editor and publisher of the South African Sunday Times. He lives on the KwaZulu North Coast. Rather brave of him, I should think. And he has a long piece at Unheard called Anarchy Rules South Africa. The nation has become a gangster state. I'm not going to read from it. I'm just going to point this out to you if you are interested in South Africa. And as commenters noted of this piece, it's refreshing to see because, again, in recent years, we have averted our eyes from the horror of that place. And speaking of horror, how about Haiti? There is at the Fitzwilliam.com, there is a piece by Craig Paulson called Hispaniola's Great Divergence. Why are Haiti and the Dominican Republic so different? Yes, and the editor of the American Sun brought this to my attention. Yes, but we're not going to, I'm really going to look at those questions. I would say that one of the questions is one of the reasons for the great difference between Haiti and the Dominican Republic is a racial difference. And the other is that Haiti is the only country that I know of that was formally dedicated to Satan, consecrated to Satan, which has to count for something, right? I think it does. And I think this is the final one from Unheard today. From Dominic Sandbrook. I have reviewed several of his books on the book club. He's a tremendous writer, historian, and he gets the macro picture and the micro picture. I really like his attention to detail, to cultural detail, and I mean culture in every respect. His latest book is called Who Dares Wins, Britain 1979 to 1982, and it's highly recommended. His piece is called Why the Tories Love a Clown Show. Footwear is now more important than ideas. In the summer of 1995, the Tory leadership struggle was in full swing, and after days of intense excitement, Britain's next prime minister, or so he hoped, was poised to emerge into the national spotlight. The challenger was young, ambitious, and burning with intensity. His credentials were impeccable. Brought up in a council house of humble but aspirational stock, he was famously clever, with a doctorate from Oxford and an All Souls Fellowship. He'd become a Conservative councillor at the age of just 21. He had worked in the city. He had been Margaret Thatcher's chief policy advisor. As a relative newcomer to the cabinet, he was untainted by the disappointments of recent years. He had a rare clarity of ideological vision, a fiery sense of political direction, and while other potential assassins had ducked the prime minister's challenge to face him in open combat, he had embraced it. A man of courage, then, a warrior of truly puritanical fervor. Even the sun had come out in his favor. This surely was his moment. Then out he came, flanked by his supporters. The cameras flashed, and everything went horribly wrong. Viewers were startled by the strange green-clad torso behind John Redwood. As he spoke at his press conference yesterday, began Matthew Paris's sketch in the next day's Times. No head was visible in the frame. I can reveal that it belonged to Mrs. Teresa Gorman. We would recognize that bust anywhere, unquote. It got worse. On Redwood's other side stood the ferociously right-wing MP Tony Marlow. His mates call him Von Marloff, noted Paris, dressed in a boating blazer so garish, so violent, it almost made Gorman's lime green jacket look tasteful. Another sketch writer likened it to a chair from the passenger deck of the Hindenburg. That was being kind. Yes, apparently aesthetics are very important in politics, but obviously there's exceptions to this. Again, how does Jacinda Ardern, how did she hypnotize New Zealand into believing that she was tremendously physically attractive? Dominic Sandbrook asks, have today's Tories reached their Redwood moment? Maybe not. Maybe when the winner is crowned in September, striding confidently into Downing Street to take control of the economy, the weather will change in their favor. It's just possible, if you really try, to imagine a future in which Ukraine wins the war in the East, world commodity prices begin to fall, energy and food bills drop, the threat of COVID fades, the NHS backlogs ease, and work begins on tens of thousands of voter-friendly new houses. Squint hard enough, and perhaps you can glimpse Liz Truss waving triumphantly to her activists in 2 years' time, dressed, presumably, as Margaret Thatcher in the summer of 1987. But even as I write this stuff down, I find it very hard to believe. It's often said that politics is show business for ugly people, but today's Tory party seems an awful lot closer to Barnum and Bailey than to the glamour of Hollywood. Do diehard conservatives, I wonder, have any idea how they appear to the general public? When Nadine Dorries attacks Rishi Sunak for wearing an expensive suit and the wrong shoes, when Sunak himself talks of incarcerating asylum seekers on floating hulks, when Truss puts on her pantomime Thatcher Act, do none of these characters have any dignity or shame? Perhaps the only sensible thing a serious Tory politician has said in the last couple of weeks came from the Cabinet Office Minister, Johnny Mercer. Worth remembering, he tweeted a few days ago that on current trajectory, we are out of power in 2 years' time. The puerile nature of this leadership contest is embarrassing. Time to raise the standards. Well, I don't know. Is it worse in Britain than it is in the United States, where Kamala Harris, a vice president of the United States, and one heartbeat, as they used to say, or perhaps one slip and fall from becoming the next president of the United States, said in public in an interview that she was defined by her sneakers. Yes, this is a grown woman saying that she is defined by her sneakers. Smoke 'em if you got 'em, folks. This is a story from Vice. New Zealand will ban smoking for future generations. Could Australia be next? As the New Zealand government prepares to give passage to world-leading plans to ban future generations from being able to purchase cigarettes, local tobacco control experts are watching on with envy. Now, they suggest, is Australia's opportunity to follow suit. In December 23rd last year, New Zealand's Associate Health Minister, Dr. Ayesha Verrill, announced in Parliament that older smokers around the country would only be able to get their hands on tobacco products with low levels of nicotine. By 2025, the government hopes that less than 5% of the nation's population will be smoking. How about marijuana? It's no accident that the war on tobacco is close to final victory, even as marijuana is being legalized everywhere, because marijuana is an entirely harmless drug that in no way breeds passivity and, on the other hand, schizophrenia. No. On Tuesday, things came ever closer when the Ardern government introduced new legislation that would prevent future generations from ever purchasing a cigarette. I can only hope that the result of this madness is, criminal activity, smuggling on a vast scale. We've already seen it in my own country of Canada, that after government decided that they could gouge cigarette smokers, even more unreasonably they've been gouged in the past, suddenly Indian bands all over Canada became the source of cigarettes to many non-Indians. And this story is a similar story, is from Time magazine. Malaysia is considering a ban on smoking and the sale of all tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, to people born after 2007, joining New Zealand lawmakers in a once unheard of move against one of the most common causes of death worldwide. Because smoking is so very dangerous. You know what is also very, very dangerous to health? Male homosexual activity. But we would never hear anything about this. We don't want to say too much about monkeypox and who gets monkeypox and how they get monkeypox, because that would be, homophobia. It would be attack on the customs of an oppressed minority. And yes, let's ban tobacco. However, let's not ban the sexual mutilation of children, because what is that compared to the evil of smoking tobacco? This is from Eleanor Hayward and Lucy Bannerman at the Times of London. The National Health Service is shutting down its gender identity clinic for children after a damning review found that it failed vulnerable under 18s. The Gender Identity Service at Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust has been ordered to close by spring 2023. It will be replaced by regional centres at existing children's hospitals, offering more holistic care with strong links to mental health services. Tavistock has been accused of rushing children into life altering treatment on puberty blockers. The pediatrician, Dr. Hilary Cass, who is leading a review of the service, has today issued a series of recommendations for a radical overhaul of how the NHS treats young people who are questioning their gender identity. She found that the Tavistock Clinic was not a safe or viable long-term option, and that other mental health issues were overshadowed when gender was raised by children at the clinic. Amid concern that the clinic fails to take into account wider health problems before putting children on puberty blockers, Cass said staff should maintain a broad clinical perspective in order to embed the care of children and young people with gender uncertainty within a broader child and adolescent health context. So bad news for the groomers, is it? I don't think that it is. And I'll tell you why. Here's a story by Dan Ladden Hall at the Daily Beast, and it refers to an organization called Mermaids. Yeah. See, you're not a boy or a girl anymore. You're a mermaid. Isn't that exciting? Isn't it? Just sounds. Let's leave this world, of rules and boundaries behind, and live like mermaids. We welcome the news that NHS England plan to provide a more resilient and robust gender identity service in 2023 by expanding provision and improving the quality of care received by trans, non-binary, and gender-diverse young people, Mermaids said on Twitter. So clearly, the fix is in. And more on this subject. This is from KATV.com. Alex Schlemmel. Earlier this month, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration added a warning to gonadotropin-releasing hormone agonists, commonly known as puberty blockers, indicating there were serious risks for youth who take them. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration identified 6 cases in females between the ages of 5 and 12. 5? Urge to something in Minecraft Rising, who were taking GnRH agonists, which presented a plausible association between agonist use and pseudotumor cerebri. Pseudotumor cerebri, also known as idiopathic intracranial hypertension, occurs when the pressure inside your skull spontaneously increases, which can cause brain swelling, severe headaches, nausea, double vision, and even permanent vision loss, according to the Mayo Clinic. The warning seems to conflict with U.S. Assistant Secretary of Health Rachel Levine's claim that there is no argument among medical professionals that youth access to gender-affirming care, such as puberty blockers, is valuable and important. Levine's critics have charged her with conflating opponents of alphabet people equality with those seeking to limit minors from accessing certain potentially life-altering gender transition therapies. And this is from the Post Millennial. Come on. And the author is Christina Buttons. Parents are flocking to Facebook support groups for transgender children where they can announce their child's new transgender identities, ask questions, and share anecdotes about their lives. A lesbian woman and her partner who identifies as a transgender man has made several posts to one such a Facebook group about her biracial twin daughters, one of whom claims to identify as non-binary. In her most recent post to the group, the mom shares a photo of a biracial non-binary doll with a bag of M&Ms next to it, with a caption that describes how she is using it to train her 6-year-old twins to use gender-neutral they-them pronouns, even though the child, who she says is non-binary, doesn't want to. The child is used as positive reinforcement for referring to the doll using they-them pronouns. My 6-year-olds were complaining that using they them pronouns is too hard. Even the one who's non-binary enters the mom's Facebook case. Enter Kai, spelled Kai, my non-binary doll. I set Kai on the dining room table. Every time they use Kai's pronouns correctly, they get an M and M. Again, something in Minecraft. Okay, I'm not going to read that one. Enough of this topic. This is from Jamie Phillips at the Mail. A female police officer will stand trial accused of mocking George Floyd. I'm going to repeat that. A female police officer will stand trial accused of mocking George Floyd by sharing racially offensive WhatsApp messages. PC Joanne Jinks, 40, was serving as a senior officer at West Mercia Police. That's not a surprise. At the time the messages were allegedly sent in June 2020. The former officer will stand charged with 3 counts of sending grossly offensive messages. Earlier this year, Jinks was accused of sending offensive messages under the Communications Act 2003 with another serving officer, James Watts, also West Mercia Police. Watts was jailed for 20 weeks in May after he pleaded guilty to 10 counts of sending a grossly offensive or menacing message by a public communication network. He is found to have posted racist WhatsApp memes mocking the death of George Floyd in May and June 2020. Mocking it how? Could you perhaps paraphrase this for us? The male constable's name was also added to the College of Policing's barred list, meaning he will not be able to work in any policing role across the country for life. Oh, sorry, we are not accepting comments on this article. Can't imagine why. I recently read, but I couldn't find the reference, recently, a person in Britain was imprisoned for referring to Prince Harry as a race traitor. Imprisoned for this. But of course, that does in no way changes the fact that Britain is a grossly, systemically racist country where the racists just run amok. They call all the shots in Britain. And here's another story from the Mail. This from Chris Pleasance. Spaniards have been told to take off their ties at work to cool down rather than relying on air conditioning as Europe struggled to get to grips with its energy crisis today. Perhaps they will be encouraged soon enough to take off their shirts, to be naked from the waist up, or maybe they can work just in their pants, as they would say in Britain. That's people from over here get into trouble with that word. Pants means underpants in Britain. What we call pants, they call trousers. Pedro Sanchez appearing tieless, good for you, Pedro, in front of reporters at Moncloa Palace in Madrid, said he has encouraged all public officials to ditch the neckwear ahead of an announcement of more energy-saving measures on Monday. I'd like you to note that I'm not wearing a tie. Yay! That means we can all make savings from an energy point of view. Is it really the tie that makes all the difference? I would think that an, buttoned-up shirt would be more important than that. EU states are desperately trying to find ways to cut their energy use before winter arrives after Russia began throttling gas supplies to the continent. Germany has already begun turning off streetlights in Berlin, while Hanover will shut off hot water in public buildings. Oktoberfest and Christmas markets also face being scrapped, politicians have admitted, and breweries could be closed. I don't understand that part. Because people like their beer ice cold or just ice cool, as they say in Britain. Is that the reason why? During the Corona Doom panic, I do not recall anywhere efforts to stop people from getting a hold of liquor. I suggest, that would be a bad idea and would have been a very bad idea, 2 years ago and a year ago, 6 months ago, whatever. This is from Just the News. Hugh Zijin, former editor-in-chief of the Chinese state-run Global Times, on Friday suggested that the People's Liberation Army shoot down a plane carrying House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. If U.S. fighter jets escort Pelosi's plane into Taiwan, it is an invasion, Hu wrote on Twitter. The PLA has the right to forcibly dispel Pelosi's planes and the U.S. fighter jets, including firing warning shots and making tactical movement of obstruction. If ineffective, then shoot them down. Well, that certainly raises the stakes, wouldn't you say? And let's see if there's any new info in this story about European civilization collapsing as we just look at it. It's just falling apart, and it's all Russia's fault. Of course, none of this would have happened if not for the green struggle, and if not for the idiotic idea that Russia is just a house of cards. It just needs a little shove, and it will collapse, and then we can carve it up into 10 or 12 different countries. I take it, reflexively, that when Western newspapers make grand claims about Russian military failures, this is pure projection, that Ukraine is suffered disastrous losses. And here's an example from Fiona Connor at the London Sun. At least 75,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured in the Ukraine war disaster, the U.S. has claimed. In a devastating blow for Vladimir Putin, it is now believed that half the number of troops committed to the war by Russia are now casualties. So I guess it'll only be a week or two before before Ukraine rolls up right to the Russian border, and perhaps beyond. Not a chance. And the pundits and the betting agencies seem to believe that Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss, is going to be the next Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. John Stevens at the Mail, Liz Truss has vowed to be Ukraine's, quote, greatest friend, unquote, if she becomes Prime Minister, following in the footsteps of Boris Johnson. Yes, apparently she's not afraid of the curse of Putin. The Foreign Secretary pledged to double down on support for Ukraine and to make President Vladimir Zelensky her first call to a foreign leader if she becomes the next occupant of number 10 Downing Street. Truss also said that she would update the Integrated Defense and Security Review in light of the conflict in Ukraine, something opposition MPs and the Commons Defense Committee have been seeking for months. She said, what transpires in Ukraine matters to us all. This isn't just a battle for territory or conflict between two nations, but a great struggle between those who believe in sovereignty and self-determination. You must be kidding. And authoritarians who want to crush freedom and true democracy. Oh, true democracy. Why don't you tell us more about false democracy then? And let's go to Moon of Alabama. This is from today. A panicking Biden administration seeks talks with Russia. Here is another story that demonstrates the incompetence and arrogance of the Biden administration. The New York Times reports of a potential prisoner swap between the U.S. and Russia. And it's the black lesbian basketball player who got caught with dope. Russian officials who have long sought the release of the arms trafficker Viktor Bout confirmed the discussion on Thursday, but said Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was too busy to talk with Secretary of State Blinken now. Typically, prisoner swaps are not talked about publicly before they happen. Yes, I think so. Several veteran hostage negotiators were perplexed that Blinken made the offer public. It is baffling why the U.S. would announce this proposal in the midst of the negotiations, said Rob Sale, the former head of the FBI-led hostage recovery fusion cell. Sale's suspicion was justified, as the Washington Post now reports. The Biden administration disclosed publicly that the U.S. had made a substantial offer to Russia to secure the release of 2 American prisoners, and that this had stalled. I do not understand why the administration has started such negotiations even before the Griner court case had been closed. In general, such prisoners will only be pardoned and released to the other side after they have been sentenced. Anything else would raise accusations of executive interference in the judicial process. The Brittany Griner case over admitted smuggling of cannabis oil is still in court. The Russian government will obviously refrain from doing anything about her before the judicial process has ended. And let's move on now to, let's take a look at Summit News. Yes, this is funny. Rand Paul congratulates Joe Biden for achieving real immunity against the corona doom. Oh, and a shocking story from Fox News. Hey, any of you video fans might remember this woman called Kennedy, who was one of their boss jocks or whatever they called them, VJs, back in the 80s? And then she reinvented herself as a conservative, and we all know what that means. And she's on a panel, and she just the worst hairstyle. What on earth is she dressed in? And those glasses. Oh, you're famous for your glasses. You know, they don't suit you anymore. Not that they ever did. But no, she is just terribly offended that someone on this Fox News panel, Ned Ryan, congressional candidate, mentioned the truth about monkeypox. And this is from USSAnews.com. A Fox News panel on monkeypox erupted after Ned Ryan suggested people should avoid gay orgies to not catch monkeypox. Speaking on Kennedy Nation on a Tuesday night, Ryan, a senior fellow at American Greatness, handed out some good advice for those worried about monkeypox. I think there's a pretty good rule in life, Ryan said. Don't attend gay orgies. The panel, which included host Kennedy Montgomery and Brad Palumbo, a policy correspondent of the Foundation for Economic Education, began expressing their outrage at Ryan's comments, who remained defiant. Do you know anything about this Brad Palumbo fellow? I do. Given the comments that he has made in public about, let's just say young people, I'm surprised that this guy is allowed to speak anywhere. Go look at the New England Journal of Medicine's report that NBC News reported on Friday, in which of the 528 cases they received, 95% were sex between men. I think we actually have to have serious conversation about where this is coming from instead of going crazy and declaring a national pandemic when 3,000 people have it now. It's insane. I don't know, man, Montgomery responded, or Kennedy. You don't have to be gay to get monkeypox. You don't have to be bigoted when you talk about treating something that is easily spread. It's not bigoted. This is science, Kennedy, Ryan exclaimed, who was then swiftly shut down by the host. Kennedy suggested that of the monkeypox vaccine, the smallpox vaccine is lower on the priority list for distribution because it is impacting the gay community. Palumbo, a gay man, gosh, you could hardly tell by his physiognomy, tried to argue that gay orgies weren't the problem and that not going to orgies in general was a good way to not get monkeypox. He argued that people had to be really careful when discussing the topic. We saw with the AIDS crisis, with the HIV crisis, but how certain communities or certain gay people will be stigmatized, or something that lots of people do, and we got to be careful about that. That's something that lots of people do. You want to expand on that, Palumbo? Marie Harf, a Fox News contributor and the third panelist, said that Ryan was using bigoted language that suggests the only people that get this are from one group of Americans. Hey, guess what? Gay men also have friends and family members and colleagues, and this is not just transmitted through sexual activity, Harf said. It's transmitted through close contact. You don't fight diseases. I'm glad brought up HIV/AIDS. You don't fight diseases by caricaturing the people who get them or who get them at one point in time. Who is this Marie Harf person? I've heard the name before. It just indulged me while I look her up. She was former deputy campaign manager for policy and communications for Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts presidential campaign. Senior advisor of strategic communications to U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry at the United States Department of State. Oh, I know who this woman is. Yes, she is one of these shrikes who would not be too happy about the world blowing up because America must bring democratic values to the whole of the world at gunpoint. We bomb them because we love them. Yeah, she's one of those. Well, is there anyone besides Tucker Carlson? Is there anyone else at Fox News who is worth watching? Can you name a single person? Laura Ingraham, is she any good? Sean Hannity certainly isn't. And we've got a new book. We have a new book to read. And it is from 1964. It's by James Burnham, and it's called Suicide of the West, an essay on the meaning and destiny of liberalism. And just a little bit about James Burnham. We read his book, The Machiavellians, previously. James Burnham was born in 1905 and 1987. He became a full professor at New York University of philosophy at the age of 25. He was one of the leaders of American Trotskyism, which he later rejected, and then communism entirely. His book, The Managerial Revolution, made him famous. He was one of the original editors of National Review, and exceedingly influential thinker. I suppose his most well-known acolyte would be the late Samuel Francis. But his distinction in the Machiavellians between what people say and what people do, I think is crucial, more crucial than anything else in understanding how the world really works. And I'll start today. I guess I'll read John O'Sullivan's introduction. James Burnham is usually seen as a cool and unsentimental analyst of world politics and ideological movements in the 20th century. This description is certainly one that fits most of his major works, such as The Machiavellians, his best book in my judgment, and The Struggle for the World, his most consequential book. It also accords with his advice in these works for assessing and dealing with global politics and ideologies. And it probably reflects his own image of himself as a sober realist, warning people not to trust the idealistic slogans that mask the cruel realities of all power. In most of his works, he seems to be saying, like the prophets, this world is a vale of tears. Don't expect justice in it. The wicked flourish like a green bay tree. The good are doomed to be continually betrayed and disappointed. The best we can hope for is that a balance between different masters, between greater and lesser evils, will allow the humble to enjoy a moderate temporary prosperity. Analyze your way to that clearing in the jungle as best you can. His famous maxims at National Review, where he is remembered by Linda Bridges and Rick Brookhiser as a quiet, authoritative, exacting editor and a kindly colleague beneath a restrained and gentlemanly exterior, exude the same dry, unillusioned tone of rebuke to human self-deception. For instance, you can't invest in retrospect. Some of Burnham's critics, notably George Orwell, accept this self-portrait of the artist as a self-consciously scientific, even amoral analyst of power politics. Orwell's criticism indeed includes the accusation that Burnham displays altogether too much relish when he is describing the remorseless necessities that drive men to oppress and murder others in uncertain times. He comes close, writes Orwell, to the worship of power under a mask of realism. All these aspects of Burnham's literary personality, except perhaps the last, support the picture of him as a realist, almost passionless analyst. But this impression is blown away by reading even a few pages of Suicide of the West. There can be no doubt that this is the work of an engaged and passionate writer responding fiercely to events in the world that strike him as something between a tragedy and an outrage. The realism is there still, as it always is. So is the cold logical reasoning. But they are not expressed coldly and not indignantly either, since a Lear-like raging at the political weather is for Burnham the mark of modern American liberalism. On the contrary, the realism and logic are expressed sarcastically, wittily, savagely, and at times with a kind of despairing enjoyment at the repeated follies of his inveterate opponents in the liberal camp. Suicide of the West is the first book in which Burnham grabs his readers by the lapels and shakes them hard, rather than merely pointing quietly to obvious facts that have managed to avoid noticing. His arguments are as strong as ever, but not always as minutely documented. He builds his case against liberalism with bold insights as much as with his usual logical deductions. His tone is prophetic rather than professorial. Injustice and folly no longer amuse him, they enrage him. This is the unbuttoned Burnham, and the result may not be his best book, but it is surely his most inspired. What inspired him then? Let me suggest three things. First, as Roger Kimball's fine and informative introduction establishes, Burnham's life was a succession of different moral, political, and artistic commitments until he reached a permanent haven in the 1950s. He was an aesthete in the 1920s, a Trotskyist in the 1930s, a theorist of oligarchic collectivism, see Orwell, in the first half of the 1940s, an anti-communist strategist in the second half, and a founder of a new American conservatism in the 1950s. These are the conversions of a man highly attuned to the spirit of the age, even when he was sharply opposed to it. As such, he divined in the early 1960s what was to happen in the later 60s, and this shaman-like sensitivity transformed the tone of his arguments even when he was rehashing older material from his lecturing days. Second, the contradiction between the objective realities of the early 1960s and the response of liberal policymaking must have been infuriating to an observer of Burnham's insight and ability. Though the West, and in particular the United States, were dominant economically, militarily, and morally, they were everywhere faltering, uncertain, or even in retreat over Hungary, Suez, Algeria, Vietnam, the Bay of Pigs, and so on. Burnham had argued for a form of political warfare designed to undermine the Soviets. He thought containment inadequate, and even that was being feebly enforced. Third, even while he was helping to found the Congress for Cultural Freedom in the 1940s to win Europe's liberal intelligentsia to the side of anti-communism, he had glimpsed that liberal intellectuals on both sides of the Atlantic would bolt toward a morally equivalent neutralism as soon as the United States had to take some action internationally that could not be justified in simplistic liberal terms. He knew by now that the Western order of global power was the freest, most prosperous, and most just order available to mankind in that era. He had looked into the soul of American liberalism and seen the vacancy there. He could guess what was coming. And in response, he cast aside his customary restraint and indicted liberalism as the doctrine that reconciled the West to its own needless defeats and eventual dissolution. We should probably read Burnham's other works in the light of Suicide of the West, but we should also follow the light that it casts forward to illuminate his final years. On his deathbed, Burnham returned to the Catholic Church they had left in his 20s without, as Kimball notes, any apparent soul-searching. What prompted his return to faith? Any man's reasons for turning to faith can only be known fully to God, but it would hardly be surprising if someone who saw clearly that injustice is the way of this world, while also finding injustice intolerable, should seek and find increasingly necessary a world in which the wicked no longer flourish and the good no longer suffer, and the intelligent analyst can find more pleasurable pursuits than indicting crime and folly for what they really are. That's John O'Sullivan's introduction to James Burnham's Suicide of the West. I'll just comment here that in terms of the dispute, say, between James Burnham and George Kennan on containment versus a more active stance against the Soviet Union, it seems to me that history has proved George Kennan correct, that the Soviet Union was nowhere near as powerful than we imagined it to be. On Monday, I will read, it's quite a long introduction, perhaps I'll break this into two halves. Roger Kimball, he's the editor of the New Criterion, his introduction to this work. Let's take a look at the chat. Okay, here we go. Oh, yes, yes. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Jonah Goldberg dared to use the same title, Suicide of the West, for one of his utterly forgettable works. Now, it's impossible that Jonah Goldberg did not know of Burnham's book, but perhaps he thought, oh, yes, well, I'm just as good or better a thinker than James Burnham, so I'm going to use the same title. Emmett Kelly Zer says, but Kennan seemed to be backing away even from containment later in life. I really want to have a talk with any Germans, read the present perfect tense and the gendering of the sun and the moon, says British American. But he says cursive isn't really taught in grade school anymore. Many kids need to learn their signature as a teenager. We were taught cursive when I was in elementary school, and I was atrocious at it. And it hurt my hand to write that way. It hurt my hand to write longhand. And I just how would you put it? The attitude of my hand to the page was such that not only was my writing almost impossible to read, but my writing hand was just stained, terribly stained with ink. From about the 6th grade, I just started writing everything in, well, not quite block capitals, but just abandoned cursive entirely. Hello to Ruslan Akhmetov. Says sun is mostly masculine in Romance languages, moon feminine. Max Vitriol says, I can attest Goldberg knew about Burnham. I briefly met him and asked him about Burnham. Did you ask him why he was so arrogant? Displayed such hubris? I remember when Goldberg showed up on the scene and I thought, oh, okay, so this guy makes a lot of jokes and some of them are funny. And then I found out that's all it is jokes. Oh, yeah, and everything that I disagree with is fascism or communism or something. And let me tell you another story about my dog. We all love dogs, don't we? Oy. And maybe Kevin needed an oblique nib. We had these strange pens, which you don't see anymore. They were like quills, but they were made of plastic. They had a very long, like, long like this, okay? It was like thin to put your fingers in, and then it was thicker on both sides, and then a long taper, very long taper. And of course, people used to chew on it and bite off little pieces, gnaw them away, such that if you got too close, eventually the whole system would come apart, and the spring would come out and your pen would be useless. But I don't know, for the longest time, just strict instructions. Bic pens are not allowed in this school. That if you have a Bic pen, it will be confiscated. And who else do we have? My mom made me practice handwriting. I never mastered it, says Laird Gordon McDoodle. I'd never heard of Megan Mertz when she was on this show, Suits. And then when I was introduced to her, as it were, one of her many skills is a freelance calligrapher. And I thought, what is that a euphemism for? A lot of call for calligraphy these days? Who else do we have here? We were required to have good penmanship in Catholic school, says Ruslan Akhmetov. Well, I'm afraid they would have failed me if that's what it came down to, because that's how bad my handwriting was. And the experience of riding a donkey, in other words, is still present for that speaker. We consider the difference between I've ridden a donkey and I rode a donkey in Egypt last year. Okay. Jim Smith, hello, says, I think Brad Palumbo is a Hillside College graduate. Ned Ryan is the son of former congressman and former world record holder in the mile. Jim Ryan. I remember Jim Ryan very well. I mean, he was the fastest man in the world in middle distances. But he was one of those runners who, when it came to the big competitions like the Olympics. For some reason, he always failed. It was a big disappointment. Of course, I remember reading that he ran typically something like 70 miles a week. And I'm wondering if this could be part of the problem, you know, because even they sent even those who race the 100 meters until, what's his name, Charlie Francis, the crooked drugging coach. He wasn't just good because he got his charges to use drugs. He had a great innovation. You win a 100-meter race by running 100 meters, or a 200-meter race by running 200 meters. Your ability to run 40 or 50 miles a week, it's a different skill. And he thought that the runners were exhausting themselves by this, and I think he was right. So maybe getting milers to run 70 miles a week, not a good idea. Of course, you see that with marathon runners. Marathon runners run very few marathons now, for the reason that they finally figured out that every marathon that you run, since it always involves forced starvation, is not good for you. It's terribly bad for you running a marathon, because the first fellow who ran a marathon, he fell over and died at the end of it. Okay. Enough of grammar. Let's talk. Okay. I'm going to be moving into the book club shortly. But Sunny Hostin thinks WNBA players should be paid same amount as NBA. Their salaries are just not comparable, she says. Indeed, they're not. And, I feel rather, stupid and ashamed at having to point this out. Nobody watches the WNBA. The only reason that league exists because of massive subsidies from the actual NBA. So there is one salary complaint. Of course, the lesbian soccer players, Megan Rapinoe, and they won. They get the same salaries on the American national team as the male players, even though nobody cares about women's soccer either. I saw what Off the Press was mocking Sydney Sweeney for this. Euphoria star Sydney Sweeney claims she can't afford to take a break in LA. This is from Joshua Shin at ADN America. Popular actress Sydney Sweeney revealed that despite her recent breakthrough, she still feels like money is tight. In her candid cover story with The Hollywood Reporter, the 24-year-old starlet admitted that the pressure of making the most of this pivotal moment in her career led to a series of panic attacks in June. The blonde bombshell, best known for her role as Cassie Howard in HBO's Euphoria, explained that she can't get her mind to shut up and is constantly losing sleep over fears she will lose her relevance as a rising star. If I wanted to take a 6-month break, I don't have income to cover that, Sweeney said in an interview. I don't have someone supporting me. I don't have anyone I can turn to pay my bills or call for help. They don't pay actors like they used to, and with streamers, you no longer get residuals. The established stars still get paid, but I have to give 5% to my lawyer, 10% to my agents, 3% or something like that to my business manager. I have to pay my publicist every month, and that's more than my mortgage. Sweeney recently published a historic $3 million home in Los Angeles' Westwood neighborhood in January. She told The Hollywood Reporter that she had been picking up brand deals to make ends meet. I don't really think that this is mockable, because for a long time now, Hollywood has determined that all actors are making too much money, that producers aren't making enough money. Producers and creators they're making too much money too. I was really shocked when I found out that Dan Harmon, he owns 10% of the show Community. 10%. But it used to be that, within you have a few guest shots, maybe 6 or 8 guest shots on network TV shows, and that was a solid living. Well, what you get for guest shots now, the pay has been cut and cut and cut. And oh yes, and with streaming, no more residuals. That we can just run this over and over and over again, or you can choose to run it over and over again. And so, but the people who did the parts, they are not going to get compensated for this. Now, I deduced something from this interview that given that she is facing these money problems when she is not working, and working in Hollywood, that's not a job. That's not a regular job. It comes in fits and starts. What this article tells me is that she is not yachting, and so I must applaud her for that. Given how she looks and her figures, she would be making a fortune if she decided to go down that route. And I think I'll talk about Montana and the literary business on Monday. Leading up to the book club, I'll just note a couple of stories. This is from Eleanor Harding at the Daily Mail. White pupils are the ethnic group least likely to attend a top university for the first time, following a national drive to make intakes more diverse. Department for Education statistics show 10.5% of white youngsters are at an elite university, the smallest proportion of any ethnic group. Historically, Black pupils were the least likely, but in the latest data, they overtook their white counterparts with 10.7% now attending. How about that? But of course, this is more evidence that Britain is systemically racist, and that, it's pretty much a genocide, an ongoing genocide for BIPOCs in Britain. Instead, the British elite has decided to throw Britons to the wolves. This is from Stuart Carr at the Mail. Of training videos instructing civil servants that Britain is a racist country and white officials should avoid clashing with people from ethnic minorities. The reel is currently being shown to workers in the department for leveling up housing and communities. It tells bureaucrats they should be aware of their so-called white privilege and should strive to be allies. The video states, when we become an ally, this primarily means acknowledging that we ourselves are part of a society, norm, culture, or system that is racist. For many of us who are white or white passing, meaning that we're often identified as white in public spaces, the color of our skin or race or ethnicity has not had a negative impact on our lives. We call this white privilege. Yes, we have this near eliminationist language directed at white people with no end in Britain, which is just further proof that Britain is systemically racist, and the treatment of BIPOCs is, practically genocidal. This is from Brendan O'Neill at Spiked Online. Can the woke scolds not leave us alone for 5 minutes? Judging from last night's opening ceremony for the Commonwealth Games, the answer to that question is a firm no. The ceremony was a big fat finger wag at the nation, an amdram lecture to the masses on the right way to think about race, colonialism, gender, blah, blah, blah. It was like being beaten around the head with a copy of The Guardian for 3 hours. What ought to have been a sparkling celebration of Blighty ahead of a 2-week sporting festival that is exactly the pick-me-up this troubled nation needs was turned by the Beeb and the Birmingham glitterati into yet another opportunity to hector Joe Public about issues. Millions must have switched off. To borrow woke parlance, it's all so exhausting. There's no escape from the right on nags. Go to your bank and you'll be smothered in pride flags and swarmed by staff wearing the sacred icons in the new religion, pronoun badges. Be you, they cry, unless you is a gender-critical feminist or a lesbian who doesn't want to have sex with women with penises, in which case definitely don't be you. Pop into Sainsbury's for a loaf of bread and you'll be invited to talk about race. I'd rather not. Go to work and you could be beckoned into a meeting room at any time to confront the white privilege you never knew you had. And forget trying to seek sweet temporary respite from all this browbeating by sitting down to watch a sporting spectacle like the Commonwealth Games, for there will be Claire Balding, who, by the way, is a lesbian, and Tom Bloody Daly, yeah, the bloody is in the text, who is a male homosexual, ready to chide you some more about your wrong think. We should have seen it coming. On Wednesday, The Guardian published its most Guardian article ever, aptly written by someone called Andy Bull, calling on the Commonwealth Games to confront his sports washing past. Bull said the game should be prefaced by one of those warnings about outdated attitudes like these games were predicated on the mistreatment of people and cultures. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually did something like that, I thought to myself, and lo, they did. The BBC kicked it all off with a poem about the past evils of the Commonwealth. Well, you know what? The Commonwealth is an entirely bogus institution. And I can prove to you that it is bogus. You see, there used to be the Empire, later called the British Empire. And then there was the British Commonwealth. Now it's just called the Commonwealth of Nations. What unites the Commonwealth of Nations? Well, all of these countries were formerly British colonies. But what is their connection to Britain now? They don't have one, except that they provide immigrants. I'm going to just run through a list of Commonwealth countries and how many of them still recognize the Queen as the head of state. So, Bangladesh, there's 166 million people live there. No. Barbados, no. Botswana, no. Brunei, no. Cameroon, no. Cyprus, no. Dominica, no. Eswatini, I've never even heard of that. No. Fiji, no. Gabon, no. Gambia, no. Ghana, no. Guyana, no. India, no. Kenya, no. Kiribati, no. Malawi, no. Malaysia, no. Maldives, no. Malta, no. Mauritius, no. Mozambique, no. Namibia, no. Nauru, no. Nigeria, no. Pakistan, no. Rwanda, no. And Samoa, no. Seychelles, no. Sierra Leone, no. Singapore, no. South Africa, no. Sri Lanka, no. Tanzania, no. Togo, no. Trinidad and Tobago, no. Uganda, no. And Vanuatu, or how it's pronounced, no. And Zambia, no. So you see that the vast, vast majority of populations of countries that belong to the Commonwealth have no ties to Britain, to the Queen. This is a vanity exercise, a pathetic vanity exercise. And so it's no surprise that Queen Elizabeth II has been all in since she became queen. That it seems that the Commonwealth is more important to her than Britain is, which has had, let us say, deleterious results for the people of Britain. The Commonwealth exists now almost solely so that people can say nasty things about Britain. For instance, how systemically racist it is. Well, speaking as someone from a member of the Commonwealth should be abolished. It serves no purpose. None. No useful purpose at any rate. Tom Bauer has a book called Revenge about, the Windsors and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Came out 8 days ago, I believe. And it's a huge bestseller already. And it's a very controversial book, as you might imagine. I've read several books by Tom Bauer. And as I've said about him previously, this fellow always gets the goods. And so he has in this case. As for his writing style, well, it's serviceable. It smacks too much of what Private Eye calls Sylvie Crin, rather breathless, you know. And as far as inaccuracies in it, I'll mention some that I noticed. And I noticed those with regard to Canada, because I'm a Canadian, that Bauer expresses mystery several times as to why Jessica Mulroney was so close at one period to Megan Mertz. And he doesn't seem to understand that, of course, Jessica Mulroney is not only the daughter-in-law of Brian Mulroney, longtime former Canadian Prime Minister, but at the time when Jessica and Megan became tight, Ben Mulroney, Brian Mulroney's son, or one of his sons, was one of the biggest media figures in Canada. And of course, Megan Mertz was living in Canada while she was performing in the show Suits. She was the 6th ranked performer in this show Suits, which ran on the USA Network. And oh, yes, she's a big star. No, Bauer is very good at this, at pointing out that Megan Mertz never a star. That when Suits ended, about the time that she was 35 years old, there were no offers coming in, no substantive offers of acting work. Megan Mertz was on TV, of course, and Deal or No Deal, where she held a briefcase. And she made some commercials, and she has a bunch of Blink and You'll Miss It appearances in some movies. And Bauer says, and I think I have to agree, that the reason why she was never very successful as an actress is that she's not a good actress. As it turns out, she's good only at playing herself. She's very good at that. Don't laugh. There's lots of people who are terrible at playing themselves. That's a cliche in television shows and movies. So, oh yes, and of course, one of the things that's really brought home in Bauer's book is the importance of family with regard to marriage. That when you marry, when a woman marries a man or a man marries a woman, you're not just marrying them, you're marrying their family as well. And as far as Megan Mertz goes, everyone seemed to forget this. Megan, of course, was first married to a Hollywood producer, and they were divorced. Trevor Engelson was his name. And after the couple broke up, why did the couple break up? Well, see, Megan wanted to trade up, always looking to trade up. And Trevor Engelson did not become as big of a producer as she hoped that he would be. And I get her idea seemed to have been that he'll become a big shot producer and he'll give me all these juicy roles. Well, that didn't happen. Megan did not want to have children with Trevor Engelson, which is a very succinct way of saying, I don't really love you, because I don't want that connection. After the divorce, Engelson's family made it known that they had always been wary about the marriage. One, because Engelson was Jewish and she was not. And two, because Megan Mertz's family can only be described as a disaster zone. Just her father and her mother and all of the previous marriages and the like, it's just bankruptcies and drug abuse and alcohol abuse and shaking fists and how dare you, etc., etc., etc. Now, her father, who has been Thomas Markle, who has been treated terribly by both Megan Mertz and Prince Harry. It was as if we were supposed to believe that he was just some sort of disheveled drunk, you know. And Megan Mertz really did. I think that she wanted people to look at him like that. Thomas Markle, born in 1944, was a lighting director and a DP. He worked in television. He won 2 daytime Emmys. He worked on hit shows like Married with Children and Friends. And he made a decent living. most of which was funneled towards Meghan. She went to Immaculate Heart School in Los Angeles, a very Tony and very expensive private school. He paid the bill. Later, she wanted to get into an Ivy. She could not. She went to Northwestern for its theater department. It's still very expensive. He paid the bill. He paid for everything for decades. Exhausted, keep in mind this is after tax income, exhausting all his money and going heavily into debt to support her education and afterwards. And later, Meghan made it appear as if he had been a drag on her for years. Just the amount of lies that she's told about her life, that she grew up as an only child. No, not at all. She had 2 half siblings, that she was terribly poor, and that she lived at the $4.95 Sizzler buffet. Untrue, completely untrue. There was nothing that Meghan wanted that her father did not give her. And that, oh yes, I got dumped onto the set, because there was nowhere else for me to go. As it turns out, this was a treat. It was only on Fridays that she got to hang out at whatever set her father was working at. Oh, that she was reduced to working at a yogurt shop during high school. Can you imagine the horror of that? She didn't work at a yogurt shop. But of course, the big question when one considers Meghan Mertz and Prince Harry is, what happened the last time that a prominent British royal married an American divorcee who was older than he was? How did that work out? Not too well. Not too well. But probably better than it's going to work out with after Harry and Meghan Mertz are through trashing the monarchy. And you may have seen a very ugly rumor about Prince William, which has been floated in the last couple of days, which I'm not going to repeat because it's disgusting, but there's no question in my mind where this comes from. It comes from the Markle Harry slime machine. I mentioned the Commonwealth earlier because it's just one of the examples in which the Windsor family has proven itself not fit for purpose. I am not a Republican by nature, but one looks at the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. I mentioned the Commonwealth. I mentioned her relentless multiculturalism and her belief that there's no particular reason why Britons should be considered first in Britain. She's been very clear about that. And then the issue of marriage comes up, royal marriages. Back in the old days, royals married royals. They did not marry aristocrats who were not royals, let alone commoners. They married other royals, which meant that the royal families all across Europe were all related to each other. Well, they were mostly, overwhelmingly, almost exclusively German. The last foreigner to marry into the British royal family was Philip, who was a prince of Greece, but he was German. Name of Battenberg, later anglicized to Mountbatten. Philip was a man of principle and a man who served almost to his dying day. In many ways, a model. However, he was a weak father. And we can see this with what happened to their children. Let's start with Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, the eldest. A selfish man, a sybarite. He put off marriage again and again and again. He had many suitable women that he could have married, but no, he wanted to sow his wild oats. And so crisis was reached. Is this man ever going to get married? Well, you better find someone quick. And so he picked an 18-year-old named Diana, who, for all of her talents and beauty, was completely unsuited to being Prince Charles' wife and later presumptive queen of Great Britain. Completely unsuited. And she had many, many affairs. She started doing this before Charles did. I'm not going to defend Charles's behavior in this marriage, but they were all having it off with others. And she was a relentless publicity hound, so much so that on Spitting Image, she was caricatured as wherever she shows up. Does anyone here have AIDS? And see this picture of her? She was enamored with some East Indian, I believe, heart surgeon, some such. And there's a picture of her, and she's in the operating room, next to, the bed where the operation is taking place, and she's got a mask, and you see all this, raccoon stuff in her eyes. You do not wear eye makeup when you are, looking down in the operating theater, close to the patient who's being opened up. And if you look at his other children, if you look at Randy Andy, well, a couple of things about him. The woman that he married also completely not right, unsuitable, perhaps even worse than Diana, greater embarrassment than Diana. Randy Andy's proclivities were known for decades before he was finally busted. And it's impossible for me to believe that this did not get back to the Queen. If you look at Princess Anne and, again, the man that she married, unsuitable. It only seems to have worked out with, Prince Edward, the youngest. Again, strong woman, strong mother, weak father. That's a bad combination for children. I blame Queen Elizabeth a great deal for the disaster that is the marriage of Harry and Meghan Mertz. That Meghan Mertz was determined to bully the royal family, and I guess they weren't used to being bullied. For instance, her insistence that her marriage would be as grand as the marriage of William and Kate. Well, William is the heir and Harry is just the spare. And since William has 3 children now, they don't even need him as a spare. But she got her wish with just this grand wedding and a completely inappropriate wedding. Let's bring in some Chicago preacher, black preacher, who was supposed to have 6 minutes and went on for 13. And oh my God, how long is he gonna talk for? Talking about things that have nothing to do with the royal family or the monarchy. And the guests that she brought in, oh, let's bring George Clooney in here. I don't know George Clooney, but I'd like to. Oh, that sort of thing. George Clooney, oh, the man of great integrity, a great moral figure, who got bought by Nestle for $40 million. And, Meghan is such an incorrigible liar that I'm forced to agree, to my sorrow, with Piers Morgan, that if she read the weather report, I wouldn't believe it. It is clear, there's incontrovertible evidence that she studied the royal family and Harry in particular for quite some time. Oh, I didn't know anything about the British royal family. That's why you were photographed posing in front of Buckingham Palace when you were 12 years old? Really? And there's little question that she was guilty of perjury in the case against the Daily Mail, or the company Associated News, which owns the Daily Mail. Guilty of perjury. They took perjury quite seriously indeed in Britain. Later, she said, oh, I completely forgot my discussion with this royal official about the book Finding Freedom that was written about me. that I claimed I had nothing to do with. I had completely forgot that I didn't write that withering letter to my father by myself, that I had a royal official help me with it, and it had been vetted. She just forgot all that stuff. Nevertheless, the judge said, he dismissed the Daily Mail's appeal and said, no, there doesn't have to, I'm not going to let there be a trial. It would have been very awkward. It probably would have destroyed both Harry and Meghan if they'd been forced to testify under oath in open court. Meghan claimed and then dropped the claim that the wedding itself wasn't all that important because she'd been secretly married a couple of days earlier by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, as Bauer points out, secret marriages without witnesses are illegal in Britain. And all the information about, who was there, that's a matter of the public record in Britain. But Meghan has, I'm going to say that I've done kind of a 180 on Meghan Mertz. I now have this kind of sneaking admiration for the most worthless woman in the world, who, by dint of sheer hard graft, has made herself the idol, the cynosure, if you will, of every worthless woman on earth. As for Princess Harry, this book strengthened my belief that he is a detestable ginger slug. This is a man who sold out Britain, who sold out the monarchy, who sold out his family. All from pique. My mummy died. Yes, and that's sad, but it was 25 years ago. I'm an expert in mental illness. Well, how are you an expert in mental illness? Because I've suffered from the SADS for so very long. But I've discovered that it's liberating to feel worthless. Is it now? This is the message for both Harry and Meghan, that don't be afraid to admit that, your feelings of misery and worthlessness. And you should really dwell on all of the miserable events in your life. Just keep dwelling on them, because that's the way to, to break through. And mental illness is really kind of a superpower, as Greta Thunberg would have it. So Harry decided to marry a woman who, mixed race. About 30% of the students at the Tony private Catholic school that she went to, very expensive, as previously mentioned, were about white. And no one considered Meghan Mertz to be black. She is half black, or kind of, sort of. Such as her coloring, that people would assume that she was Italian or Spanish. She passed. She can choose whoever friends she wants, but it's significant to me that for all her, it's black, blackety black with Meghan Markle now, throughout her entire life, her friends have been almost exclusively white. And her cultural milieu has been exclusively white. But so she's an Instagram influencer. That's what she did for a living. And this is the woman that Harry chose. I'm going to read a little bit from the book. Her next idea was the Tig, named after the Italian wine Tignanello, and designed by Jake Rosenberg, the Canadian-born designer of Couverture magazine. Meghan described herself as, quote, the editor-in-chief of my lifestyle brand, a website to flaunt wealth, luxury clothes, a glamorous jet setter's lifestyle and wellness. The Tig, she wrote, is a hub for the discerning palate, those with a hunger for food, travel, fashion, and beauty, and to be a breeding ground for ideas and excitement and inspired lifestyle. You see, on Suits, she talked the producers into them making her Character, a paralegal. Ooh, she's a young woman in the city, a paralegal. Wow. You're really, don't fly too close to the sun. So, and it just, what she is saying now is exactly what she was saying going back to 2014, when she was a barely known actress and an Instagram influencer. Megan's routine was to leave early in the morning for the studio and, after a day's filming for Suits, head for the gym. On her return home, she spent the evening scouring the internet for ideas. The assiduous researcher combed the highbrow Economist and lowbrow Darling magazines for snippets. She trawled other websites for ideas, sought free products from luxury brands like Hermes in exchange for promoting their handbags, and emailed endless celebrities for comment and endorsement. To build her credibility, she needed to be associated with stars, if possible, with a photograph to prove their friendship. The celebrity hunter's strength was to seize every opportunity and never take no for an answer. Sweet talking her entry into a charity football match on an artificial indoor beach at New York's Pier 40 on the Hudson River, she met, among other players, Serena Williams, the 23-time Grand Slam tournament tennis singles champion. In Megan's version on her website, quote, "We hit it off immediately, taking pictures, laughing, and chatting, not about tennis or acting, but about good old-fashioned girly stuff. So began our friendship," unquote. Noticeably, no photo of Megan with Williams appeared on the TIG. Brent Ratner, the Hollywood film producer and long-term boyfriend of Williams, never heard him mention Megan. Although Megan had never been seen holding a tennis racket, she wrote how she and Serena were united by our endless ambition. Similarly, she secured an introduction to Ivanka Trump, a daughter of the New York property tycoon. "When we have drinks," she told her followers, "I will make sure I order whatever she does, because this woman seems to have the formula for success and happiness down pat." Ivanka's beautiful designs of shoes, furniture, and clothes were afterwards embraced on the TIG. Not mentioned was Meghan's rejection of Donald Trump's invitation to party with him while working on Deal or No Deal. Also not mentioned was Variety magazine's report announcing the fifth season of Suits. Meghan had been again listed sixth and last in the cast list. The audience, however, was increasing towards 3 million. To build her profile as an opinionated, life-loving star, Meghan hit on a tested formula. She conjured up intimate, personal revelations that, laced with colorful fantasies, did not have a totally faithful relation to the whole truth. Presenting herself as a racy Hollywood goddess, she mentioned her love of good food, copious amounts of rosé, spicy tequila cocktails, and neat scotch. Describing herself in one post as a saintly hippie, she disparaged fancy restaurants, boo, and pledged herself as good company, embracing every little second of it. This is a woman who went on to spend over £10,000 a day for accommodation, over £10,000 a day, and become an habitué of the most expensive restaurants in the world. Meghan stipulated her ideal man. Dressed in a linen shirt, she visualized him barefoot on the beach, eating a slice of pizza. Yeah, right. And inviting her for a drink on the way home. Presents of lingerie from him were always nice. "Be the bold adventurer," she advised. "I think it's important to roll with the punches and enjoy every minute of it. If he makes you laugh, that helps." The result was a website reflecting a woman of conviction with commercial sensitivity, a chancer with perhaps a limited sense of humor. On that 33rd birthday, she reminisced about her struggles as a teenager and as an actress. She summed up her recipe for happiness as a single woman. Quote, "You need to know that you're enough," a mantra that has now ingrained itself so deeply within me that not a day goes by without hearing it chime in my head. That 5 pounds lost won't make you happier. That more makeup won't make you prettier. That now iconic saying from Jerry Maguire, "You complete me," frankly isn't true. You are complete with or without a partner. You are enough just as you are. So for my birthday, here's what I would like as a gift. I want you to be kind to yourself. I want you to challenge yourself. I want you to stop gossiping, to try a food that scares you, to buy a coffee for someone just because, to tell someone you love them, and then to tell yourself right back. I want you to find your happiness. I did. and it's never felt so good. I am enough, unquote. You know, you think you've reached the end to the shallowness, and then you realize that there are many, many, many more levels below that. Such is Megan Mertz. And, you know, given that Prince Harry had the example of the catastrophe that became, you know, his mother's life and her unseemly, shall we say, death, one would think that he might have been born or, you know, became warned off women such as Meghan. But no. And stupid, oh so stupid Harry continues to push the ridiculous line that the media murdered his mother. It wasn't that the driver of the vehicle she died in was drunk, was dead drunk, and also stoned, and he insisted on racing through tunnels under the Seine at over 100 miles an hour. That obviously had nothing to do with it. So I highly recommend Tom Bauer's book called Revenge. A real page turner it is. And you will learn a lot about Megan Mertz that you didn't know. And best to consider this, you know, a comedy, a farce, really. It really is best to look at it that way. Yes, of course, it's true that Megan Mertz could be the end of the monarchy in Britain. That's not an exaggeration. That's a considered judgment from me. But you know, if you can't find the humor in things, where are you going to find yourself? Let's take a final look at the chat. Harry would lose it, Crusader King says, yo mama. That's why I'd never tangle in a debate with a comic, says British American. They're way too quick with the comebacks. Remember Meghan had the royals set up an organic greenhouse, says Oscar Toe. British American says, I've always admired people who could think on their feet, e.g. in debates, and didn't have to suffer the regret expressed in that French phrase. What's that? Esprit d'escalier? Is that the phrase? Or have I got it backwards? Meghan's half-sister is suing her. Good times. Yes. Meghan has insisted that she was an only child. She was not an only child. She has said that this is her truth. This phrase, her truth. She's addicted to this phrase, her truth, as is now Harry. He talks about his truth. Oh, so I have my truth. You have your truth. This person over here has his truth. There's 7 billion different truths in the world. So when she lied and said that she was an only child, well, she felt like an only child. You could have said that you felt like an only child. Visionary Companion quotes Keith Richards, I wouldn't trust those people with a sharp stick, much less a sword. Do you know what Keith Richards said when it was put about that he'd had a sexual affair with Margaret Trudeau? He said, I wouldn't touch her with a barge pole. It would seem that it was Ron Wood of the Rolling Stones that had the affair with La Trudeau. Esprit de l'escalier. Yes, there we go. Okay. Milieu, another great gift of the French language, says British American. Oh, Tom Bauer is saying, you know, that Megan Mertz could run for Congress. She would never do that. Congresswomen are nobodies for the most part. Congressmen are nobodies for the most part. It also actually involves work, a lot of boring work. You know, AOC has made herself a celebrity. But, you know, Megan Mertz has been desperate forever to be rich, to be really rich, you know, to be George Clooney rich or even richer than that, not to have to worry ever. Oh, and poor Harry, he inherited 27 million pounds from his mother, and he gets about $15 million a year from his father, but it's not enough. Oh, they're just constantly worrying. It's just not enough. Yeah, I suppose if you want to buy, a California spread that costs $25-30 million, with cash, then you got to be pretty loaded. But for most people or most couples, a nest egg of 27 million pounds plus $15 million a year in income, that's pretty good, you know. Kevin, are you as offended by the Ontarian accent as you should be? Asked Buddy. This boot, the Canadian accents, from the Pacific Ocean to the Quebec border, there's one accent now, pretty much. There's one accent. They used to find regional accents all over Canada. It's the influence of American TV, actually. Okay, Kevin does not have this accent. No, and a lot of people say that I don't have a Canadian accent. Fine, I can live with that. But again, the Canadian accent has become boring and uniform. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the show. I appreciate you all tuning in. I will be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So what's coming up culture-wise? What's coming up culture-wise on the show next week? And let's see the thread on Music Monday. I am going to be talking about, one-hit wonders. So maybe you can come think of your own one-hit wonders, introduce into the conversation. On Theater Thursday, I am going to talk about a movie starring Henry Fonda, directed by Henry Fonda and Vera Miles, directed by Alfred Hitchcock from 1956, and it is very closely based on a true story called The Wrong Man. And on the book club next week, I'm going to discuss a much talked about recent publication by Matthias Desmet, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, which introduced us to the now popular phrase mass formation psychosis. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.